Want to welcome all of you and welcome Dr. Doug Mark. As it turns out, he and I have a mutual friend in common. I have a friend from Badminton who is a pharmacist, and he dropped by my house the other day to say hello, and he mentioned that he knew Dr. Doug Mark. And I'm not sure what he says to other people behind my back, but he said of Dr. Doug Mark that he's a saint. So we are quite grateful that Dr. Doug Mark is with us and to share his expertise on the COVID-19. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put everybody on mute, and if you have any questions that you have during the presentation, please type it into the chat box. And when you type it in, press enter, and I'll take a look at it, and I will post the question to Dr. Mark. So without any further ado, Doug, please. Unmute and begin.
Thank you very much, Reverend Juan here. It's truly my pleasure, honor, and I'm delighted to be here to talk to you about COVID-19. I'm calling this talk the science and the vaccines because they are quite timely right now. Just as a starter, I am a University of Toronto graduate from 1985. I did general medicine and I practiced in family practice. And I don't have any sponsors or not paid by anybody. I don't have any special investment in any vaccines. So this is a completely unbiased talk. It is coming from a family physician, and it's not to replace the advice from your professional healthcare providers. And let me get into the topics of the outline here. So we can talk about the COVID-19 basics, talk a bit about pandemics, a brief history, the science of COVID-19, the science behind the vaccines themselves, a few resources, and we'll sum things up. And throughout this talk, Reverend Her and I will have a bit of a dialogue. So he'll ask questions, he'll interrupt me if he's not sure about something. I might toss some questions out to him too as well. So I hope you might get him interested in some of your questions during my talk. If something's not clear, feel free to send him a message and keep him busy so I don't want him to fall asleep. You can fall asleep, but we don't want him to fall asleep, okay? Okay, thank you very much. So first of all, why do they call coronaviruses? Any idea, Juan?
Because of the spikes in the virus that kind of looks like a crown.
That's right. They look like crowns. And did you know that only common colds are caused by some 200 plus different viruses, but 15% of common colds are caused by coronaviruses. They're not nearly as serious as these ones, as you know. The SARS epidemic we had back in early 2003-ish or something. And there are other illnesses like the MERS virus came out, were similar, and coronavirus as well.
Yeah, so, MERS being a Middle Eastern respiratory virus.
That's right. That's true, yeah. And we're lucky it didn't spread like this pandemic has spread too. So I just want to make sure we're clear about something about the COVID-19 virus. And I'm just going to take off this stop share so I can do a little demonstration. So the unique thing about the COVID virus, as you know, there are spikes on it. So this is my coronavirus little figurine. This is Earth, little Earth, big Earth. And imagine he's covered with the spike proteins. In this case, it's cauliflower. So just imagine he's all covered with cauliflower. And these cauliflowers are very unique. They stick to the inside of blood vessels, just like this. Okay, and inside the blood vessel, this is a pet toy. This is what our pets would run through, especially Tim's cat Evie. Mm-hmm. So inside you can see there's little things hanging down that would represent blood vessel blood pressure receptors called angiotensin receptors. And these little spikes Oops, I lost one of my cauliflowers. Okay. Just imagine the spikes are on the COVID virus. It actually sticks right into the blood vessel and attaches to those receptors. And then it can attack through the vessel and into the body. So that's why the COVID virus can attack many different places in our body. Wherever there's blood flow, then the virus can set up shop and then do its damage. So that's the very unique thing about the coronaviruses, and that's why there's so much they're so difficult for us to fight for many people. Any questions? Okay.
But I guess the virus is airborne. So how do they enter into the bloodstream?
Yeah, so they tend to enter right into, that segues nicely back into my next section here, the science. So let's go back to sharing my screen. First, I'd like to go into a bit of the timeline, and then we'll talk a bit more about the science of the COVID virus. Mm-hmm. Okay, don't let me forget. Okay, thanks. So this is a visualization of the history of pandemics. I'm just going to scroll down, and there we go. So you can see, okay, it starts near the top here. I'm going to get the pointer out. Here we go. Okay, can you see this here? Oh, great. You can see I drew right there, right? Okay. Starts at the top here. I'm going to try to get the laser pointer here. Is this better? Ah, there we go. Can you see the red dot there?
Yep.
Okay. So it starts here at 0. Of course, when Christ was born. Before that, even, they had evidence. There's evidence of pandemic type things going on even 5,000 years ago in China. They found homes that were just full of buried skeletons, and of all ages too. What they would do is they'd put all the people in one house and they'd burn the house down, and that's what they found in China many thousands of years ago. But from here, you can see the Antoine plague, the plague of Justinian. That was the first bubonic plague, I believe. Japanese smallpox. 1 million people died there. And each of these little fluffy things represents the size of the epidemic and how many people died. So here in 1300s, there was the bubonic plague, the Black Plague, Black Death. That was 200 million people passed away. In 1520, smallpox, 56 million people. And then the 17th century Great Plagues, 3 million people passed away here. Then the 18th century Great Plagues, 600,000 people passed away. That's 1700. And it's going to scroll down a bit more. Sorry about the purple thing there. And then here, the cholera outbreak. That's 1817 to 1923. And then the third plague, 12 million people passed away. It's 1855. And then we have, let's see, yellow fever. That actually occurred in Philadelphia. Yellow fever typically in South America and Africa, but 100 to 150,000 people passed away then. Then the big green thing here, that's the Spanish flu. 40 to 50 million people passed away there. There's the Russian flu. And the big one we don't think of, but it's always been there, HIV/AIDS. That's 25 to 35 million present from 81.
Wow, that's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people, and we don't hear about it much, but there is treatment for that, though. But the poor people, of course, poor countries can't afford to the treatments. That's one of the big problems. Then we have the Asian flu, Hong Kong flu, 1 million people there. And then most recently, of course, SARS, 770 people passed away.
That's it?
And, yeah, it's quite small. Yeah. And then MERS, as you mentioned, the Middle Eastern one. And then the swine flu back in 2009, 2010. That was the Spanish flu that came back, right? Yeah. And then, of course, Ebola. Luckily, that was contained and the new vaccine came out. Canada was part of the vaccine process for that one. Luckily, they didn't spread out of Africa. And here we are with COVID-19 at 2.5 million people who've perished.
So,
infected.
yeah, so,
Perished, yes.
yeah. So the pandemic has been throughout the, I guess, recorded human history that
Yes.
has been ongoing for a long time and pretty consistent.
Absolutely, I'm afraid so. And people, if I was watching a speaker, he was in Belgium, who was part of the Ebola virus pandemic. He was there through the whole process. Eventually, when they were able to stop the Ebola. And 2 years before this pandemic started, he was telling people in Brussels, the world is not prepared. Government's not listening. When pandemics are going to happen, we have to get more prepared. Bill Gates did the same thing too 1 year before this pandemic came out too. He's trying to push governments and public health agencies to prepare for pandemics. So I hope they're listening this time, but
Yes.
we'll see what history does in the future. But unfortunately, pandemics tend to recur, and we'll probably get another pandemic, hopefully not for another 100 years, but it'll come. But at the same time, though, science has progressed quite a bit, and we'll talk more about that shortly. So I'm just showing can you see that's picture of the map of the Earth here?
Yes, yes.
So it's showing the number of global cases, almost 114 million cases, and the United States has 28 million, India, etc. And this is the cumulative cases in red. If I change to active cases, you can see how bad our American colleagues are to the south of us, and Europe looks pretty heavily hit too. Interestingly, Africa has done very well. You may have heard, as well as India. India does quite well because it just seems like a lot of people caught the disease and they've been able to achieve herd immunity fairly quickly there without vaccination.
Any reason why industrialized countries have been pretty badly hit, like in Europe and US and so on?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Even South Africa's pretty badly hit. I suspect maybe it's because we spend a lot of time indoors in close quarters. We go to restaurants, gymnasiums, places of worship, our homes. We spend a lot of time indoors. That might be it. So it's hard to say, but we know that some countries did not do very good social distancing, no masking and staying home type of things. So that made a difference as well.
Yes.
There's countries like of Australia, of course, because it's an isolated island nation. Is that a continent? I can't remember. Do you remember one?
It is a continent, yes.
Okay, thank you. It's like an island, so they basically shut their borders. I remember watching tennis throughout the year. None of the Australian players were at any of the tournaments, and New Zealand as well. They were shut down. They hardly have any COVID going on, so that made it easier. But
Mary Stepaniak just wrote that perhaps the wealthier nations have been pretty badly hit because people who are wealthier tend to travel more.
That's true. Unfortunately, they do. Oh, good luck. I erased the purple thing. Learning something new. That's good. Okay, so let's move back to my slides. Let's see here. I'm going to talk about something called the R0 or basic reproduction number. This gives us an idea how contagious an epidemic is. And the next slide. Good. So we'll start at the top left here. There's the MERS. So what these numbers represent, the 0.8 means for every case of MERS, 0.8 more people caught it. In other words, there's less than one more person caught the illness. When it's that low an R0, then the virus is not going to spread very well. So take, for instance, the next one over, influenza. You have an RO of 1.5. So every person has the flu, 1.5 people catch the flu. Ebola has an RO value of 2.0. So each person who caught Ebola, 2 other people caught it. So you can imagine if 2 people catch it, 2 more catch it, and they give it to 2 more, that's 4 more, and so on. You can see how that could spread quite a bit.
Yeah, that's
So COVID-19 is about 2.5. SARS was 3.5, but it had a considerably higher, what's that called again? The RO. I wrote it down, but thank you. It's easy to see R or R0 value. So SARS is much more contagious, but much more deadly. So it didn't spread as far and as fast. And it didn't have what COVID had. COVID has a lot of people have no symptoms and they're spreading the virus, or they're very mild and they're spreading the virus. Mumps, 4.5. Rubella, German measles, 6.0, very contagious. Smallpox, 6.0. And the worst, measles, 16.
Wow.
One person got measles, and that's about it. So thank
Wow.
goodness for those vaccines we have for many of those things now.
Yeah, so one person spreads to 16 other people.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's very contagious. Okay. So that, again, is called the basic reproduction number, or R0. Okay, so moving ahead. I'd like to talk about the science of COVID. And this is where I can get back to your question. And I have a diagram by Colin Funk, Craig Ferrier, and Ali Ardekani. And then I have an interesting slide. There were symptoms of people on the USS Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier. So you see what kind of symptoms COVID typically gets. And another slide talks about which part of the body it attacks, a comparison to influenza, and a timeline of treatment that was postulated back in 2020 of March. And then just a little bit about medical management and in general, and how it's changing so quickly. So moving to the slide here. Better get out the spotlight thing again here. So let's start over, spotlight on. Okay, can you see the red dot here?
Yep.
So near the top, you can see the COVID, the virus with little spiky proteins on there. Mm-hmm. So it gets in through our nose and mouth most commonly. So when we wear our masks, the masks prevent the large droplets from flying out and getting on people and whatnot, but the smaller little particles, the little droplets, can get airborne. So that's the problem, because that might spread quite far. And one of the biggest things that people can do if someone's homesick with COVID, that they have a window open a bit so they get fresh air moving, either have their room or even have your house have windows open so you get fresh air in your house. And the HEPA filters can also help filter out the virus. So it's another way to reduce the numbers. So that's why it seems to spread so well, because it is quite airborne. So it gets into the nasal passages, down into the windpipes. And as I showed you in the diagram, it can get into the tissues and then start getting into the blood vessels and spreading around through that. And if it gets floating through the blood, it can also land in different target organs as well. So if you look down here, how the virus enters into the cell, it attaches to the angiotensin receptor here, and it sticks and goes in and takes over the cell, and it starts putting its RNA, so it's a single strand RNA type organism, as opposed to us, we have two strands. We have DNA double helix, right? Deoxyribo, never mind, DNA. And then the virus starts to replicate itself, and then it can pop outside here with many more viruses. But the immune system will pick it up, such as right here, the APC cells, and that triggers an immune response. So you get T helper cells, the B cells that go on to create antibodies, which attack and stick on to the actual COVID spike proteins. The T lymphotoxic T cells grow into these things here, which I call them T killer cells. So they're like tanks. They can just attack and eat the viruses too. So there's two different types of immune responses that occur in general in the body. There's the humoral, which is the antibodies, and that's the kind of thing we typically get when we get vaccinated, and we can test for those, the antibody levels, to see if somebody is immune or not. And then the cellular type of immunity, and there's no simple way of testing for those as far as I know. And it makes a difference when the vaccines are discussed a bit later, because they work in both different ways, and the way they measure their efficacy, they do it different ways, such as looking for the antibody titers, the levels, or symptoms. People get sick or die. They look for those kind of endpoints. So that changes what a vaccine's effectiveness may appear as when you look at the numbers.
So the elderly have difficulty with the virus because their immune system is not as robust. Is that the reason?
That's absolutely right. I have a slide for that later too.
Okay.
Read my mind, Juan. Thank you.
All right.
But keep your day job too. We need you. Okay, so I'm going to switch to the next slide. Okay. Oh yeah, these are the symptoms, and I can't see them too well. Let me move this bar a little bit. Oh, good. Okay, so this is the USS Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier, and this shows you the blue line in the center means like neither more or less. It's just the neutral line. And to the right means people who have those symptoms. The very first one is loss of taste, smell, or both. So when we inhale this virus, it can get up into our nose and start attacking our noses, our sense of smell. And many people lose their sense of smell, and it doesn't come back very fast. So it's way to the right. So you see this black dot in the middle here? That is the sort of the midpoint of the range. And these bars left and right, that's the statistical kind of range, sort of plus or minus. The more you have in the study, the smaller that range should be.
So does that mean that 10% of the people who did test positive had the symptom of loss of taste or smell?
Yes.
Is that what that means on average?
That's correct, yes, correct. A lot of people had palpitations, so that means a lot of people had, well, they might have had fever and heart might have been racing, but actual palpitations, that should be irregular heartbeats. That would mean their hearts were probably affected by the COVID virus. And these are young people, these are sailors, right? Next is the chills, aches and pains in the muscles, coughing, nausea, fatigue, shortness of breath, difficulty breathing. Now, these are people who might be developing symptoms of the pneumonia. It's interesting that you can actually measure a drop in the oxygenation of your blood. And I forget to say it later, you can actually buy these little things you put on your fingernail called pulse oximeters. I have one here somewhere. I'm not sure if you can see this. Might be a little small window for people, but looks like this. And let's see here. I bought it off Amazon, so it's not the fanciest one. And hopefully the batteries are working. Anywho, you can put this on your finger. And someone with COVID at home, this is actually one of the things that one of the doctors recommend doing is to get one of these, along with extra batteries because they think it's dead. But you just put it on your finger, and normally it would read your oxygen level.
Okay.
And you can actually start getting a lowered oxygen level saturation number before you really notice it, because it's kind of subtle. But as soon as that happens, it could mean you're developing the pneumonia. And if that's the case, that's when you should get to hospital sooner than later. So that's the breathing part. Chest pains, then abdominal pains, runny nose. Surprisingly, not too common. Diarrhea, not too common. And then very little headache and vomiting. Look at that, sore throat's even slightly on the negative side, though it's not that significant based upon those T bars. So that's that. Next slide is, okay, this is where the virus can target. It can target pretty much everywhere, unfortunately. And I can't see the top of the screen too well. Let's see if I can move my bar thing somewhere here. This, drag that down. Now, can you see it there, lung? Oh yeah, one, it says lungs, right? Okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I see that now. So number one, it gets into the lungs, and you can see, let me grab the pointer thing again. Spot right here. Okay, so here. So in the lung tissue here, this is the, okay. So this is like the small, I believe the airways or the alveoli, the actual sacs where the lungs sort of breathe in and out air and oxygen and carbon dioxide out. And there's the blood vessel around the edges. And you can see all these little things here. Those are like cells trying to fight off the infection, the immune cells. And little teeny dots here, those are the viruses here. Okay, and then down next one here, heart and blood vessels. There's the ACE2. That's the blood pressure receptors right there. You know, a lot of us take blood pressure pills. I'm on one. It's an ACE inhibitor. No, it's an ACE blocker, angiotensin receptor blocker. So my medication actually stick in there and block those little receptors, and that relaxes the blood vessels.
So it looks as though it is creating a blood clot. Is that what the virus is
Yes.
doing? Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's attacking the blood vessel.
Mm-hmm.
So the smaller blood vessel will start to literally like tear apart, and that inflammation will set up a blood clot. Just like you get a cut, you get a clot forming in your cut. That can cause that inflammation, not only in the vessel, but it can invade into the tissues around into the muscle, and probably sets up a scarring process. There are a lot of people who are very weak and tired, and their hearts aren't functioning very well, and we won't know for months, if not years, how they do in the long run. But I'm worried because if there's inflammation and that much damage to tissue, what happens?
We did not cover that in the theology school.
What if you get a cut, right, and you don't stitch it up? What happens to it? Or
Infection? Infection?
Yeah. Well, if you get stitches there too. Remember Frankenstein? He had those things on his neck.
Yeah.
He had scars, right?
Yeah.
So scar tissue is very tough, and it can just there probably scar tissue in the heart and the lungs and whatnot. So I imagine people who will probably not recover fully, and it'll take quite a while to see how far they'll improve. I imagine it'll be probably about 2 years after the infection is over before you might see things stop to heal. But for up to about 2 years, I'd estimate they'd probably be improving somewhat. There's other things like the eyes, the nose, of course. The liver can get inflamed, which is right here. That's the liver, number 6. The kidneys and the intestines way down here. So it's a total body system thing. And you also know about skin trouble too, right? People report getting purple toes. I saw a patient just before the SARS came out, the coronavirus came out, and it was started tailing on the end of around the flu season too. And the modulator reported her toes were purpley blue and stuff. I'm thinking, maybe that was coronavirus then too, but who knows? But I'm still here, luckily.
Jackie Lovell says we dialyze a lot of COVID patients.
Ooh.
So
yeah. Yeah, I didn't realize how bad it was for the kidneys. Okay, Jackie, did you get your shots yet? Be curious to know. My parents, they're watching today. They got their second shot just last week. They live in a seniors building.
Yeah, Jackie told us that she got shots as well. She got the vaccines. Yeah.
I'm trying to get my shots, but the software at the hospital is kind of wonky. So I'll get mine soon. Okay, so this is a slide that compares the influenza, which is the yellow, and the COVID, which is, wait, wrong way. Yeah, sorry, COVID's yellow and influenza's blue, okay? So this first on the left side here talks about the number of deaths in Canada. This is from CTV, June 2020. So typically, 3,500 Canadians die every year from influenza. At this point, there were 8,500 deaths. And this was done June 26, 2020, and that's just those first few months. Okay, so the other thing different about the COVID virus is that the incubation period is different. The flu typically is very fast. So people aren't shedding viruses. They're not asymptomatic as much. And as soon as they get symptomatic, then they stay home and they don't spread the virus quite as much. And the RO value was 1.5 compared to the COVID one, which is around 2.5. The other thing is COVID typically incubates 5 or 6 days, but it may be up to 14 days before it surfaces. So the incubation period, that's why people have to stay in hotels for 14 days when they come back from England or other places. And they complain a lot for the news people. Hospitalizations, COVID had 10,000 already, and influenza typically 12,200. 12,200, that's the whole capacity of the Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center. That's a lot of people.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, but this is Canada-wide, but already 10,000 people are hospitalized. So that's got to start. Let's see here. Okay, that was only information available for 65% of case reports. COVID-19 deaths approximately as of June 25th. Okay, here's that reproduction number, the RO number, and 2 to 3 at the time they thought, and influenza here, they said 1.3, which is like the last one I showed you. So here's the case fatality rate. So for every for every case of infection, 1.6 people with COVID would die, but only 0.1% people with influenza would die. And of
So
course,
yeah. So COVID is 16 times more fatal than regular flu.
Yeah, it would look like that at this slide at this point in time. As you know, COVID, it's very, very deadly to older patients, and so is the flu, mind you, but it really is devastating for our seniors. Okay, so this is a slide I got from Forbes magazine, March 25th, 2020. It talks about what they foresaw as the treatment, what they could see treatments and prevention would develop into. So here at the very beginning, they figured we would get repurposing of drugs. And that was kind of like hydroxychloroquine. Remember Donald Trump? I don't think that does very much, but we only recently found out a drug for gout called colchicine seems to help quite a bit. So I think colchicine and using corticosteroids or cortisone type medications can help people as well. Then they came up with this here, antibodies. So antibodies are those things that we could make, and it's quite scientific now. You can actually put these into a computer program. You can figure out what you have to, how to make it. And there's different ways to make these antibodies. One of the new vaccines coming out is is it called COVAX or something? It's not out yet, but they pre-program cells to make the spike protein, and they make special little clusters like almond clusters, and they inject that into people. And those little clusters of spike protein actually are what's in their vaccine. So that's one that hasn't been out yet. But if you look across here, also there's vaccines. They're working on here, many different people working on vaccines. So down below, they figured that repurposing drugs, we'd figure things out quite early. And yeah, we did for the most part. Antibodies, we figured we could develop them and get them out fairly soon. And they did, I think it was towards the end of the year. Jackie might know when they started using these, but these are for people who are kind of sick, but not that sick, or people at higher risk. So if you're a diabetic, have heart disease, or there's one other one that's fairly common, any kind of immunocompromise. So if you're on drugs to help prevent an inflammatory condition like rheumatoid arthritis, or those are people with psoriasis with the shots now, or people with HIV or something like that, they should get the antibody. It's an intravenous medication that's infused over an hour. And those antibodies act like the immune system, and they start grabbing onto and attaching to the COVID virus to help clear them out of the system. So those antibodies have come into play fairly early. You look at the bottom line here, vaccines. Again, this is back in March of 2020. They thought, vaccines would come out by the end of 2021, phase 2 and phase 3 trials. But we moved so fast with vaccines. The old days, vaccines would take 8, 10, 12 years to get out. The fastest one I ever got, I think, was 4 years. That might have been smallpox or something. But normally they would do things like, well, we didn't have the modern technology we have nowadays, and we couldn't take genetic codes and insert them into things. So they would take the virus, inject it in chicken eggs, and the chicken egg, when the virus is in a chicken egg, it's swimming around there going, this isn't quite what I like. It's chickeny. And eventually some virus might appear that's happy in the chicken egg. And that virus then would probably not be happy in us, right? Because it likes chickens. And that's how we catch a virus, capture a vaccine by chance. So that's why it could take years to do that.
But this time they use a DNA technology and
all the genetic engineering stuff. They actually sequenced the virus's RNA code by January of 2020. So within a month or so, they knew the exact genetic code of the virus. And they start to figure out which part of that genetic code would actually be the part responsible for making the little spike proteins. So they can actually start designing something. We'll get into that with the vaccines. Yeah.
I heard that the Chinese scientists they were able to decode the genetic structure of the coronavirus, and they made it available for the whole world.
Yeah.
And the scientists began working on it right away.
Yeah.
And it's quite amazing how the information was shared and how they were able to decode it so quickly as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic, isn't it? It's really disheartening when people attack China for giving us this virus. They think it was something that they did on purpose, and it was completely by random.
Mm-hmm.
And they still have not identified what animal it came from. So we'll see. They might they'll track it down. But the SARS virus came from bats and pigs. I think if you saw the movie Pandemic, it kind of finished on that. You get an idea of what might have happened. But anywho, so let's go on to medical management. So just basically medical management, we would do something like, can you see that or not?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good. So rest. Sleep actually helps our interferon, especially at the beginning of the night. So you're supposed to sleep 7 hours a night. So people who don't get enough sleep should get more sleep. So if you're exposed to someone who has COVID, or there's someone living in your home, you probably should just stay home and get as much sleep as you can. Drink your fluids, of course, if you have a bit of fever. The question about fever is interesting because fevers actually help the immune response. And the COVID virus, I was listening to some discussions that it seems to interfere with our interferon. Interferon is that thing in our body that helps us fight viruses. And we have less of it as we get older. And then instead of the interferon levels going up and fighting the virus, it goes down. So the fever helps to increase our, I'm going the right way. Yeah, the fever actually helps raise our interferon and increase the activity of our immune system. So the one doctor I was listening to, he's on a channel. I found this channel, it's great. It's called Med Cram. So it's like medicine cramming. He was very good about what he says. So he doesn't give people anything for their fever until they get over 103, which is about 39 or something. Because if you start treating the fever too early, you actually might impair the immune system and make infection worse.
Would it help, Doug, to, I guess, have hot showers, hot baths, saunas to help with the interferons as well?
Yeah, he talked about that too, and you really have to get your core temperature up significantly. And I'm not sure, it's one of the links I have, but I can maybe share that with you later. But if you go to MedCram, that YouTube channel, you can find some of the talks there. He does talk about that. So he talks about also vitamin D. There's many observational studies where they look at people who are on vitamin D or not. You can see people's vitamin D is really low. If you're not taking vitamin D, in Canada, it's guaranteed to be a low, especially if you have darker skin. You can be deficient even. People with adequate vitamin D seem to do a lot better. So vitamin D has anti-inflammatory properties as well. It actually goes into the cell and helps cell function. So that's maybe why it seems to work. And there's a bit of research that seems to support vitamin D is important. And they're giving vitamin D to patients who have in hospital with COVID. So not all the studies show that it does something, but it does seem to support it. And if you look at all the information they see based upon vitamin D levels, or people who have low vitamin D, people who have darker skin tones, they do worse. So it's very interesting. So vitamin D, I'm saying it, don't forget to take it, please.
So normally it is free with the sunshine, but in the winter months, we do need to supplement.
Right. And even people like in Florida, they probably spend only 7% of the day outside, and they're not getting enough. So even people in the sunny climes, especially below the 35th, what do you call that? Longitudinal thing? Parallel? Yeah, that's the cutoff for them. But if you ever get your blood tested, it's worth paying the $30 to get your vitamin D level checked.
And Mary Stepaniak asked, like, how much vitamin D would you recommend?
It's a good question. In Canada, we say 1,000 IU, or one pill of the 1,000 IU a day. Most people need 3,000 or 4,000, I find, and some people need 5,000 or 10,000 because they're very low absorbers, or they have people who are more overweight tending to get a higher dose as well. So it's very complicated. So if you go to MedCram and find the video about vitamin D, it's quite fascinating. It's a bit technical, but you can do the numbers, and if you do take your vitamin D, you can get your blood levels checked. People have, in Ontario, you can get a free vitamin D test covered by OHIP. If you have osteopenia, that's borderline osteoporosis or osteoporosis, and some other things like chronic kidney disease. There's a few things where it's covered, so you can always ask your doctor and see if it's covered or not. But for $30, it's a very good test. So most people need, I find they need 2,000 or 3,000. I take 3,000 every day plus a multivitamin. I drink milk, and my level's about 120, which is pretty good. Even that might not be enough, so it's complicated. You'll see them talking about things like this other supplement, NAC might help, even some magnesium. So these are a bit controversial. Oxygen, I talked about the pulse oximetry thingy. Get one of these. If you have COVID, it's a good idea. Or if you just feel like you want to check your oxygen level, I did. That's why I got it. So this is the IVs, antibiotics I talked about. There's 2 of them on the market. One, would you like to pronounce those?
I am David Mad.
Yep.
I'm Devi Mad.
That's pretty good. That's like when we try to say the names in the Bible. So, okay. So the other thing is I mentioned the repurposed medications. That's the colchicine, for instance, and everything else is, yeah, the doctors do heroic things and the nurses. My hat's off. My hat's to all of you people. Jackie, for instance, she's right in there too. I know she's retired, but she's working part-time still, so it's very important. So the next section is the science behind the vaccines. And I'll try to, this isn't too much, but I'll show you a bit here. So I'm going to talk about the cells of the immune system, a demonstration again, humoral with versus cellular, and the existing mRNA vaccines explained is a video, another one with mRNA. This one here talks a bit about the DNA ones as well. This little one here is a pretty good one. I'll show you about the DNA vaccine. So it's very, very interesting. So getting to the immune system, as you were talking about, these are the cells of the immune system. And at the bottom, this on the left is the weaker. These are the ones we're born with. These are called the innate immune system we're born with. And they get weaker as we get older. And then the adaptive immune system. These are the ones that get stronger with age. As we get exposed to more and more viruses, our immune system has more and more information, and we can fight off more and more things. So that's what happens to our immune system. Oh yeah, time for another demonstration. Okay, time to pull out my buddy here. Okay, Earth. You see him there? All right, so the immune system, if you had a vaccination or you got this COVID, okay, the cauliflower, or maybe it's a variant, you've got some broccoli on there, okay? So there you go. So immune system is reacting. You've got things like antibodies. Here is tremor. Pretend he's an antibody. He's attacking this guy here. He's going to latch on to, let's pretend his arms, the spike protein. And when this comes, he grabs it and he takes him out. That's the humoral way of getting rid of infections in your body. The other way
That's pretty funny, Doug. Humoral way? That's pretty funny.
Humoral way. The
humoral way.
Yeah. The next way is the cellular way. So the cells, they've like, you ever been in high school and did the amoeba thing? You had a fish tank, you take some stuff out, put in a microscope, you look and you see those little things sort of walking around and eating.
Oh, yes.
Amoeba. So the cells will actually attack the COVID virus. So here's your virus hopping around, and then also this hat, this is my hat here. He attacks the actual virus and engulfs it and takes it away. So that's the cellular way of attacking the COVID virus and other viruses and things too, okay?
Oh, that's pretty cool.
So that's the way. So it's 2 different ways the vaccines work. Okay, so going back to sharing the screen. Where was I? Here. Okay, so next is a couple of videos I'll take you to. I'm not sure if this will work here.
And determined she had the mumps. Unable to sleep, he was struck with an idea. He swabbed her throat for a sample, drove to the lab, and got to work. 4 years later, his mumps vaccine was approved. It was the fastest a vaccine had ever been developed. until now.
New vaccine against coronavirus.
And it's incredible how quickly this vaccine and others have been developed.
This was done in record time.
This is extraordinary. This is the
fastest vaccine development in U.S. history.
In 2020, vaccines for COVID-19 have shattered previous records, going from development to approval in a matter of months. That speed was driven by billions of dollars and a global effort. But in some cases, it was also because of a breakthrough in vaccine technology decades in the making. Something that could shrink this timeline going forward and change how we make vaccines altogether. Vaccines teach your immune system how to respond to a threat, and traditionally there have been 4 ways to do this. The 2 most common types of vaccines work by exposing you to a weakened or dead version of a virus or bacteria. The weakened virus won't make you sick, but it will teach your body how to fight the real thing if you're exposed to it later on. This is how the measles and annual flu vaccines work. Another, less common type of vaccine does a similar thing, but uses an inert version of a toxin instead of a virus. The most well-known version of this is probably the tetanus shot. This 4th type of vaccine works a little differently, because it only uses a small part of the virus instead of the whole thing. Common examples of this would be the hepatitis B vaccine or the HPV vaccine. Some of the new COVID-19 vaccines also rely on these traditional methods. For example, one COVID-19 vaccine currently in trials uses this 4th method. It only uses one part of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, known as the spike protein. That spike protein is what allows the coronavirus to enter your cells. When injected into your body on its own, it's harmless. But your body will still recognize it as a foreign threat and launch an immune response to fight it off, which is enough to teach your body how to fight the whole virus. But isolating and preparing that spike protein for a vaccine is a process. Researchers first had to modify it, then multiply it a lot, and then assemble the vaccine itself in a lab. In fact, one thing that all 4 of these types of vaccines have in common is that they all require growing and transporting large amounts of live pathogens in a lab. And that takes a lot of time. A vaccine goes through many steps before it can be approved. But before anything else, it has to be developed. And working with live pathogens makes that process a lot longer. On average, it takes 5 to 10 years for a vaccine to reach FDA approval in the United States. Most COVID-19 vaccines have done this by overlapping the different phases of human trials and starting the manufacturing early. But some vaccines have also found a groundbreaking way to speed up this first section by shifting some of the work out of the lab and into your body. Nearly every function in the human body is carried out by proteins, so our cells are constantly manufacturing them. To do that, they make a single-stranded copy of DNA. That copy is called messenger RNA, or mRNA. Each strand of mRNA holds the information on how to make one type of protein. The cell reads the mRNA, follows the instructions, and makes a protein. And that's where these 2 new types of vaccines come in. They contain instructions. Researchers who developed these new types of vaccines, called mRNA vaccines, started with the genetic sequence of the virus. They also decided to focus on the spike protein we talked about earlier. But instead of assembling and purifying that protein in a lab, they identified the part of the genetic sequence that creates it. And then took a much faster route by synthesizing mRNA and using that as the vaccine, which saved months of time and money. Once inside the body, the cell reads the mRNA and begins to make harmless spike proteins of its own. From there, your body's immune system recognizes the foreign threat and sounds the alarm. This is how the new COVID-19 vaccines from Pfizer and BioNTech and Moderna work. But the main drawback with an mRNA vaccine is that mRNA breaks down very easily. It has to be delivered inside a protective fatty barrier and kept ultra cold, which isn't super ideal for a vaccine that needs to reach all areas of the globe. Another effective new-to-consumer kind of vaccine works similarly, but uses DNA instead of mRNA, which is much more stable. The COVID-19 vaccines from AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson are this type. It doesn't require the ultra-cold conditions, but it does have its own drawbacks. To get the DNA into your cells, researchers use a harmless virus as a carrier. But over time, your body will build resistance to that virus, which means future doses using this carrier will become less and less effective, and the carrier will need to be updated. But in terms of efficacy, cost, and speed, these two new types of vaccines have broken records. These new vaccines are a groundbreaking way to elicit an immune response. And while they'll have a big impact on how we fight COVID-19, their real impact is just beginning. A vaccine that delivers specific instructions to your body opens up a whole new world of vaccine technologies and disease treatments for things like cancer or HIV. Finding the vaccine was a turning point for the pandemic. But the pandemic might also be a turning point for vaccines.
Pretty cool, eh?
Oh, that's very fascinating that I guess scientists were able to come up with new ways of fighting viruses, and that this technology, this method, can help to treat other ailments and future viruses as well.
They've been developing these vaccines for 20 odd years. There are 2 active vaccines in veterinary communities already. So they're not new people. Some people, conspiracy theorists, are just like saying it's just, they just push these out. They're bad, they're dangerous, but I think you'll find that these are even safer than previous vaccines and definitely much more effective. So
there's a question from Rick or Susan. And the question is, so if the mRNA becomes room temperature, it does not work?
Well, what happens is they're basically encapsulated in these little lipid kind of bubbles. So it's kind of a fatty kind of coating, so that they can actually just deteriorate. So the mRNA ones, the Pfizer one, that's why it has to be kept at -80. The actual Moderna one is kept at -20, which is normal freezer temperatures, and it can survive in refrigerators for about 30 days, I understand. So at least that vaccine is something we could handle in physicians' offices, whereas the other -80 freezers, those are like research freezers, and you have to get them from, well, I know I looked them up. They're like $10,000 for one of those freezers, so they're not going to be in a smaller physician's office than that. So I'm going to skip a couple little videos there the Zeneca Oxford. I'm going to just show you a bit of this one if I can. And this is from, I believe it's from MedCram, so you get an idea what they're doing here. It's one of the best places I've ever seen for medical information.
Mm-hmm. And that is actually very similar to the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, except instead of using messenger RNA, they're using DNA to do that. So once again, in terms of a picture, imagine we have the cell and we've got the nucleus. And what we were doing before was we were taking messenger RNA, and that messenger RNA was being translated by ribosomes and converted into the protein. And what we did with the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine and the Moderna vaccine is we were getting the messenger RNA into the cytoplasm of the cell. The cytoplasm is the outside portion, as opposed to the nucleus. How do we get that messenger RNA in the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine and the Moderna vaccine in? Well, we used a lipid bilayer, or a micelle as we called it, to get those fragments or that messenger RNA into the cytoplasm. And then from there, it's fairly straightforward. The cell uses its own cell machinery, which is the ribosomes, to cause translation to occur, and you make the protein in question. How this is different is AstraZeneca uses a different technique, and it uses a virus called an adenovirus, but not a human one, but a chimpanzee. Now, why would it do that? Chimpanzee adenoviruses have not really been exposed to the human population, and so it's very unlikely that humans would create an immune response against the adenovirus specifically itself. We don't want that to happen, because if that happens, then the vaccine is not going to be effective at getting its instructions into the cell.
the adenoviruses are very common cold viruses for people too. But did you see that chimpanzee? We're monkeying around with us.
And of course, AstraZeneca knows that if this vaccine is successful and it's used on a number of people, millions, billions of people worldwide, then it's probably going to have to abandon the chimpanzee adenovirus platform for delivering instructions. Now, the adenovirus here does not use RNA like we've been talking about. It uses DNA. And DNA is a double-stranded form of instructions. Now, there's a portion there in the middle of that is used for replication of the virus. Well, the genetic engineers simply delete that portion so the virus can no longer replicate and cause an infection in the human body. And instead, they replace that portion of the DNA with the genetic code, the instructions that the geneticists have engineered. And so what happens when you deliver this adenovirus in the vaccine, it goes into the cell and it releases the DNA into the cytoplasm. And then that gets taken up and goes into the nucleus. That DNA, according to scientists at AstraZeneca, does not get incorporated into the host's genome. It does not go into your DNA in the cell, but rather it is transcribed into RNA. And that RNA then exits the nucleus as a messenger RNA, and then exactly the same thing happens as what we saw with the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, which is that the messenger RNA, which is now a product of the transcription of the DNA, gets converted into the spike protein through translation by the ribosomes, and then this goes on once again to cause the immunogenic response.
Isn't that a cool video?
Yes. There's a question from Melody about the, I guess, efficiency of these various vaccines that we have right now.
Thank you,
her
Mel.
question is, can we choose which vaccines to take to help us? And there was a news from Germany that Angela Merkel will not be taking the AstraZeneca vaccine because they're not that effective for people who are over 60.
It's I'll get into that though. It's a very good question, and I knew that would be a good thing to address. So I'm going to get to that shortly, Mel. So stay tuned, as well as the variants as well. So, what if you have to go pee or something? I'll tell you later if you miss it. So what do you think of all that, Juan? So we're injecting people with all this stuff, and the people are making the vaccine. What does that remind you of? When you get something else, something where you manufacture stuff.
I'm drawing a blank.
Where do things get manufactured in the real world?
Factories.
That's right. We're making people vaccine factories, basically, right? So by using a computer software, basically, you're designing these molecules on a computer, and you can actually create them in the laboratory, specific with genetic code, and putting them into viruses, and then using the virus as a vector. So a vector is something that delivers an illness to other things, like a mosquito delivers malaria. That's a vector. So the chimpanzee adenovirus, like a cold virus, which they can turn off the replication, they use that and they inject it in you, and it goes right into the cells and delivers the genetic material to do what it has to do. So if we can actually, and they've tried this before to treat cancer, they try to give rabbits injections of somebody's like melanoma skin cancer. And if the rabbit develops an antibody, then give people the antibody, and then they thought that could help fight off cancer. But if we can get cancer cells, figure out what's on the cancer cell that we can make a vaccine for, do it on the computer, pump out a vaccine, one injection, you cure the cancer, because it would go right in and attack the cancer, right? So that's the future we're hoping for.
It's amazing.
But we'll see. We hope nothing else will happen. But according to AstraZeneca and probably Johnson & Johnson, the DNA vaccines, they do not get incorporated into our genome, and that's a good thing.
There's a question from Susan about that. Her question is, does the DNA from the vaccine, does it stay with us forever, or does it disappear after a while?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if anybody knows the answer yet. I don't know what cells it gets incorporated into. Probably the immune cells, right? And those cells probably only live for a length of time. When they die off, more cells will be brought back in. So it's hard to say. Depends on which cells it goes into. So some of our cells don't change much at all, like our heart cells or brain cells and that too. But I'm sure we'll have more answers for that somewhere down the road. So Susan, if you hear the answer, let me know too, because I don't know that one. I'm just going to go back to my slides here and see where we left off here. Yes, AstraZeneca, Oxford, and Johnson & Johnson was just approved in the United States as well. That's the one-shot one. So the next thing is the COVID vaccines. First thing I'm going to talk about is I'm an anti-vaxxer. And guess where this picture's from? The second one is what about the possible side effects? And the fourth one is about meeting the team. That's the players, the rookies, and the wannabes, the newest vaccines. And what about the COVID variants? So here, see that picture?
Is that the Spanish flu?
That would be a good question. It might be. This was actually where?
Oh, it says,
Any guesses?
Actually, this looks like a New York City.
Nope. Guess again.
Toronto?
Yes, it was on TVO. They actually had something, and this is the picture from Toronto. Back in the day, it might have been smallpox vaccines or something like that too. They were very forceful, and Dr. Farmax, he's a chiropractor from my office, he said they were actually holding people down and giving people shots in New York City. And with that type of thing, this is what happened in Toronto. They had big protests and everything too. So there are a lot of people who be anti-vaccine because they hear things, and even it's always been the case. So if you run into somebody who's against vaccines, the best way to approach them is to respectfully ask them where their source of information is from. And usually they'll kind of say, well, it wasn't really anything scientific. I heard somebody said this, or I saw this on the news or something like that too. But
or on Facebook, yeah.
On Facebook or something too. And I'm afraid and I'm not sure if Jackie can vouch for people, but some of the people who don't want to take vaccines are the healthcare providers, the nurses, the ambulance attendants, even some doctors are thinking this is the genocide of humanity or something. So we'll have people from several camps, but these are so much more safe, very, very safe compared to the illnesses we're preventing. So, there's always going to be the odd case where there's a reaction, and we'll just keep monitoring and then adjusting as needed. But these vaccines are even safer than the ones we've had from before and much more effective. So this slide shows you the systemic effects after the first dose on the left side. Spotlighty thing. So here on the left side here, this is the days after the vaccine. This is the first vaccine. So you see the first day or two, you get more. And the green is fatigue, the blue is headache. And then further down, you get your chills or joint pain, maybe a bit of fever. The second dose of the vaccine, you get more of a reaction. So say about 10% again is much higher here, the fatigue, headache, etc., and other side effects as well. And this effect is more prominent in younger patients. Older patients have less of a response to immunostimulants and vaccines as in general. And you might worry about all these side effects, think, why do they have to have side effects? But you have to have some kind of immune response so that your body is doing something to fight off this vaccine so that it'll be prepared for the actual COVID infection too. So people who get very little reaction, like my dad, I worry about him getting full response or not. So one day we might have a test to see his levels and whatnot, and we might have boosters, but that's the gist of it. You get the 2 shots. And I think it's the Johnson & Johnson one. It's just the one vaccine, so it might be a larger dose, and they have other numbers to talk about. But these vaccines are so specific, and they turn the body into vaccine factories that we don't need to give as many shots. We may not give any boosters down the road too, but time will tell. These vaccines, these treatments, some of them were released on an emergency basis. They were not just pushed through, they were vetted and screened, and there were some other research papers. They were studied carefully by the committees like Health Canada, the FDA in the States. Each country kind of studies these before they release them on the market. So even though it's for an emergency pandemic use, they have been very well screened, and they look very, very safe. So lastly, how effective are the vaccines? So here, this is your Pfizer BioNTech. So they claim 95% efficacy. This is Moderna, 94. This is the GAM COVID, the Sputnik. This is the Russian one, 92. This is the Novavax. This is the Oxford Zeneca. And this is the Johnson & Johnson, and this is the Sinovac. Sinovac's the Chinese vaccine, which is just dead COVID virus. So I heard it was about 60. This says about 50%. You have to look at these numbers with a grain of salt. So these first vaccines here, it depends how they determine how effective they are. And they're looking for who after the vaccines got COVID, but they didn't do any testing. Whereas the AstraZeneca one in particular, which is this one here, okay, they tested them for COVID and they found that it was less effective. Okay, but later on it became more effective, and by the time they did further studies, that it's probably up around the 90% range. Plus, you remember that Oxford Zeneca, they actually had a mistake. They gave half a dose first, then a full dose second, and those people have around 90%. So you have to look at how these numbers are generated. Yeah. The Sputnik one is the Russian one, and I believe it's a DNA one. I'm pretty sure that was a DNA one as well. So the other DNA one would be this one here, Johnson & Johnson, and so Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, and the Novavax one, I believe that's the one that's just making spike proteins. So there you go. These are the players, the ones that are out there, the rookies, and then some of the new kids who are not quite on the team yet.
There's a question from Vernon Clark. And his question is, are there illnesses individuals have that will prevent them from taking the vaccine?
It's a good question. I don't think anyone should worry about taking the vaccine. Of course, if you have an allergy to any of the components, and those are very, very, very rare. There's a couple other things that I believe, here. So getting back to the question Melody had about which vaccine you should get, I think it's probably just best to get any vaccine in particular. They're all going to work. They all probably will have some overlap with the variants. The variants apparently only have a very slight 1% change in their protein compared to the original COVID-19. So they'll probably have probably quite effective in general. We also don't know how much they harm people. We don't think they're as harmful, and although they might spread quite a bit, because people have had COVID, will not spread the virus likely, as far as we can see. So that's a good thing too. So okay. Let's see here. Emergency. It's used for emergency use. Yes. So again, hypersensitivity to any component, hypersensitivity to other mRNA COVID vaccines, hypersensitivity to polysorbates, caution if immunocompromised. So anyone who's on immunocompromised drugs, but the illness of COVID would be much worse than the vaccine, I would presume. Any kind of severe injection type of reactions. If you're in acute SARS-CoV-2 infection, see if you had the passive antibodies we talked about, if you had those within 90 days, the vaccine would just be eaten up by the antibodies. And caution if you've had SARS-CoV-2 exposure before, they're not sure how that would be. So that what kind of reaction that would cause you. So, still questions, but there you go. Thank you, Vern. Excellent question.
So I guess when we go and get our vaccines, do we know which vaccines we're getting, or is that information hidden from the public?
Yeah, they'll probably tell you. If you go into one of the big clinics, they'll probably have the Pfizer vaccine. The Moderna one's coming too, so they might have a mix. And I'd say either of those two are very good. They're mRNA vaccines, both going to be very effective. And side effect profile is very similar. So right now I'd say I just get any vaccine you can. That's the best thing I could tell you right now at this time. Just have a couple more slides to do and we'll be done. So thank you very much for everyone's patience.
Are there any other questions people have for Dr. Mark?
while you're thinking. This is, and I talk a bit about the variants, as I mentioned. So the B here at the top. Okay, this is just a picture to depict them because there isn't a lot out there about the variants, I'm afraid. I hunted and hunted. So this is the B11, I can't see it. B117, that's the British one, right? The UK. And the B1351, that's the one in South Africa. So it's the South Africa one that's, we think the AstraZeneca vaccine may not work against it all, or work against very little. So that's one I'm a bit concerned about for that. But the British one, the vaccine seemed to work for that one okay. There's also one from Brazil, I believe, but we don't know a lot about that one either at this time. So at this point, we're really just waiting to see what more information we can get. So, and
there's a comment from Jackie saying that when you get vaccine, you get a certificate telling you what vaccine you got from the clinic. And Rick and Susan, they wrote, there have been concerns about the manufactured DNA affecting future generations. Yeah. We don't have answers, so should our children avoid getting this type of vaccination?
Yeah, we don't have answers to that yet. Right now, these vaccines are not licensed for people under 21, I think. So young adults are fine, but for pregnancy, we're not. There's probably a bit of caution here. Let me just look at that slide, that thing I was looking at before. It'll talk about pregnancy and lactation. So it's caution advised during pregnancy, inadequate human data available to assess the risk. And also with nursing mothers too. So can't say. And the PEDS dosing is, let's see here. It's investigational and don't think it's released yet for PEDS dosing for the Pfizer. So yeah, time will tell. So I'm hoping within the next 6 months we'll hear.
Did I hear you correctly that these vaccines should not be given to anyone under 21?
Yeah, it's the pediatric age group. So wherever they draw the line. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure. Let me just go back. Maybe I can see that on my reference here. So it depends on where they draw the line here. Some medications we consider a 12-year-old adult sized, but a lot of times it's 16. Or once they get to 16, then they're considered adults. So I'm not sure with these vaccines yet. So I don't see it in the adults listing. So sorry, I don't have an answer for that.
Well, Emily turned 16 on Tuesday, so I guess that she might be okay.
Okay. So can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
The resources. So it's just a simple place you can go to. So Canada, you can just Google these. Canada has COVID virus diseases. Ontario has the site too, where the self-checking public health tool is right there. And it's very handy. If you have a student, if you are a student, you can look there if you have any symptoms, even the stuff you know. So if you have one symptom, you think, well, it could be a cold. Well, you got to think it's COVID until proven otherwise. So if you have a stuff you know, you consider yourself to have COVID, you should be on self-isolation. Your household has to be afraid of you. And you should just basically go to the test center if you don't mind going there and getting a nasal swab done. So even one symptom, that's it. That's because you can be an asymptomatic carrier and spread the virus quite a bit. CDC is a great site, World Health Organization, Wikipedia, Johns Hopkins, where I had that map you saw there. Johns Hopkins has that great interactive map, and MedCramp's got some great lectures. They're very medical doctor oriented, but you'll learn a lot from them too. If you're interested in that, those are real sources of information.
Sorry, there's a question from Angie.
Yeah.
Will we have to be vaccinated every year, like the flu shot, or get a booster shot annually?
That we don't know yet, and it probably will vary between different age groups, so we'll find out. The antibody tests are available, but they're not. We don't know the levels yet, but you can pay for them, and it's just more of a curiosity test. So your basic labs like DynaCare and Life Labs offer those tests for you, and if you do the test, oh, look at that, I have antibodies, so that means you probably are protected to a certain degree. So I'm sure there'll be studies ongoing to check people's levels to see if they get reinfected, or to see if the virus might just disappear off the face of the earth at one point, so forth, if things go really well. So again, we'll have to wait and see, but thank you very much, Angie. Great question. So just to summarize things, COVID-19 is a serious pandemic. We've been through a lot worse. Modern science has led quickly to understanding the virus. Modern vaccines have, based upon the virus's protein structure and genetic code, should bring this pandemic to an end far faster than we can imagine. Even with the emergence of new variants, the rates of infections across most of the globe are falling. So, one last message after is stay safe, stay healthy, and stick with science. This is the World Health Organization's message. And I just want to play just a little short video.
Before we do that, there's a question from Rick and Susan. Will they make new vaccines for the new variants?
They're working on that. So they're researching, studying things. And now that they know what to do, it's basically coming down to a computer programming situation almost. So they say, this is what we want to do. We want to design the vaccine to have that feature. And they might actually come out with a rejigged version of these vaccines for the new variant. So great question, Susan and Rick. Thank you. So I just want to end with a nice little video, which is a positive message, and it's from MedCram again. This was just released a few days ago, and the trending is looking very good. Okay.
Deaths. It seems as though the numbers are starting to come down. In the United States, daily new cases have dropped precipitously, as have the daily new deaths. You can see, for instance, in California, daily new cases continue to fall. Daily new deaths in California continue to tick down overall. In fact, in San Bernardino County, where I work here in Southern California, there's been a sharp decline in hospitalizations from COVID-19. The UK has also seen a drop in new cases, as well as a drop in daily deaths. In Spain, daily new cases also continue to drop, as do daily new deaths in Spain. But there are spots around the world where this is not happening as precipitously. For instance, daily new cases in Brazil seem to have leveled off and are not coming down. The same can be said for daily new deaths in Brazil. In Germany, where cases have fallen, there seems to be a leveling off or plateauing of the daily new cases.
That might be why Angela Merkel is not getting the AstraZeneca one.
This is while daily new deaths in Germany continue to fall. Is there more information behind this trend? Well, as it turns out, there is some information. Authorities are noticing that COVID infections are rising again in Germany, just as schools are planning on reopening in 10 of 16 states in Germany. And experts believe that what's driving this is more infectious variants of SARS-CoV-2. And specifically in this story by DW, the concern is that it's the UK variant spreading in Germany that's causing this increase in cases.
So it's not all good news, but we'll see as time goes on, and week by week we'll see things develop, and vaccines might change. And with the rollout of vaccine in those countries getting a lot of vaccines going, I think we're seeing huge improvements. And I hope we don't get a wave with the new variants, but time will tell.
Yes, and it's a huge news that the vaccines are out, and I understand the Canadian government procured more vaccines per capita than any other countries in the world. So that is pretty amazing. We're very, very fortunate.
We'll be giving away like candy, I hope soon.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Yeah, so there was a question from Susan. So I guess the follow-up to the question, will they make a new vaccines for the variants? And so it would be manufactured DNA vaccine.
DNA or the RNA ones,
or
either
RNA.
Which one too? Yeah, probably.
And,
those two.
Heather asked, do vaccines interact well with medications?
Absolutely, yes. There's no problem at all because there's nothing that it will interfere with. So yeah, no problem. Yeah, unless you're on medications that may, your immune suppressing medications or something like that, you might have to adjust the dosage or something. You may not get the full response, but yeah, there should be no interaction with any of the medications out there. No. So in fact, might want to avoid taking Tylenol. If you get a fever from the vaccine, you should just go, yes, I got a fever. It's working. Instead of going, I have a fever, stupid vaccine, stupid Doug said, don't worry about it, so, okay. Yeah, don't take Advil too. Advil's bad for your kidneys. So, COVID can attack the kidneys too.
Well, thank you very much, Doug, for taking the time to put together all the informations and charts and videos and providing your expertise. It's been very, very helpful and knowledgeable. And thank you very much.
You're very welcome, Juan. It's my pleasure and my honor to help you.
Thank you, Doug. Very helpful.
High five, Doug.
Welcome.
Good, Doug.